Hi, I'm Carrie Penny, and on this episode of Secret Heart Broadcasting, I'll be speaking with Janine Violini. Janine and Jamie Whitaker run a program called Crows in a Row, and what they do is educate people about the impermanence of life and planning for the inevitable end. So if you have questions about wills, or letting people know what your wishes are when you're gone, or you even want to start having those conversations, then this episode is for you. Hi, welcome to the show today, and I am so thrilled to be speaking to Janine Violini, who's co-founder, along with Jamie Whitaker, of Crows in a Row. Janine and I are going to have a conversation about thanatology, for one thing, which is the study of death and dying and bereavement, and just embracing the idea, I think, today that life is impermanent and beautiful and wonderful. And it's beautiful and wonderful because it's impermanent, or those are my thoughts anyway. Janine, welcome to the program. I'm so glad you said yes.
Thank you, Carrie. To talk to you about anything is wonderful, but to talk to you about death, dying, and bereavement is just the best thing ever.
I am so curious about how it is. Oh, by the way, full disclosure, Janine and I met years ago in studying with Sarah Kerr about death, dying, and bereavement. And I came late to this party, but you had always this like a confidence and just this naturalness around the conversation. And I'm wondering, is there, in your background, how did you come to be so okay with the study of death, dying, and bereavement?
We'll talk about sort of the training that I did, and early on, my colleague Jamie Whitaker and we started studying got certificates in thanatology through Centennial College, and one of the first exercises we had to do in the first semester was review your life and look at the first 5 deaths that were impactful for you. And I realized that for me, most of them had come before the age of 10. So, and I just thought that was normal, which for many people it is, and tragically for many people in the world today, it's far beyond that. But in typical Western culture, it was a bit unusual, I learned. And so I think it was just having a large extended family. A lot of death happens, a lot of birth happens, a lot of death happens. And so probably that's where the comfort came from. And then really had begun doing the work and the studying and the training from about 2009 or so. Certainly with my parents' death, 1999, 2007, those were sort of transformational moments for me. But I think started the studying and everything in 2009. So probably when we met, I was pretty okay with it.
Mm-hmm. But I'm wondering culturally, like you are second generation Canadian and your family is of Italian heritage. And, maybe I'm making assumptions, but I would think you have, so much ritual around all the life transitions, birth and marriage and dying. Do you think that played into your ability to just kind of sit with this conversation and, educate people?
For sure. I think probably more than anything, a lot of immigrants would have left many family behind. So they may not have had the same experience as I did. But because I'm second generation and because my dad came with his brother and big families, my grandfather came with his brother, and then big families, my dad's brother married my mom's sister, so a lot of extended family in the mix. And like I say, when death happened, we had pretty traditional ritual around Catholic practice. I'm no longer Catholic, but that was sort of my upbringing. But it was more around the grief, and this was, I believe, a skill that my parents and my family taught me very early on. From my first remembered uncle's death, I was about the age of 3, and I can remember the grief in the house, and I got very comfortable with grief, I think.
I'm curious about, in that culture growing up, is it common to have an open coffin where people will at the funeral come by and just have the acknowledgement that, wow, the person I knew is no longer there?
For the Catholic tradition, it's during the prayers, the evening before the funeral is when the coffin is open or the casket is open, and people come by and sort of say their last goodbyes to the body. And then the next day at the funeral, it's a more formal religious ceremony, and the coffin is or casket is closed then.
Okay. And in my family, on my mom's side, they're Ukrainian Orthodox originally, but Ukrainian Catholic later. It's common to have an open coffin actually at the funeral, and that with the idea that I remember my mother telling me that, you can see that the spirit is no longer in the body, and I thought that was interesting, and I offered that opportunity to my daughter. I don't know how to say that, but we certainly went to an aunt's funeral when she was about 9, and I thought, yeah, it's time that she had that education experience. I mean, it feels so harsh talking about it now, but I think somewhere in there, it's important to be able to just start grasping the impermanence of life on earth.
For sure. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think too, what for myself, I often speak to the comment when, so we, again, lots of aunts and uncles living close by, had one of my uncles lived across the lane from us, and he died in May, so very suddenly, of a heart attack. And lots of commotion around that. My grandmother, my nonna, was making sure that myself and my other sister, the youngest kids, were staying in the house while everybody was running across the alley and the ambulance was coming. So there's a lot of fear around that. Like, I didn't know what was going on. There was lots of obviously crying and emotion. And then, as I understood and we learned over the days coming, my cousins came. My dad went and got my cousins. They were teenage at that time, and he brought them to our house to tell them. And being a witness to all of that was such an important part of my learning. And then when the funeral came, my parents said I would go to the funeral, but not to the prayer service, and sort of that was a big thing for me because. I wanted to see his dead body. I was curious at that age. I was still 5. I was about to be turning 6. And because all of my family and my cousins were all older than me, there was always talk about seeing the dead body and did you touch him or did you? And there's so much curiosity around that when you're young, when you don't know. And when you're not in it, that curiosity, I think, becomes fear. And so I love that you invited your daughter to make that choice because I think everybody is different at different times. I felt very ready. My parents didn't. And so I sort of stomped around the house during a tantrum saying, I'm going to be 6 and I've never seen a dead body. And how will I show my face? And, again, that lack of understanding, but that understanding came out of curiosity and being able to talk to my sister about it and then learn more about it. And, eventually the fear, very, very soon after the fear disappeared. And again, as I said, in my family, just based on size, it wasn't very long after that I was able to go to a funeral and a prayer service with an open casket.
I loved what you said about curiosity unexplored becoming fear.
Mm-hmm.
That just feels particularly resonant.
Yeah, just what comes to mind. One of my first death cafes was I was sitting at a table. You're just sitting in groups of people you don't know, and one person there said, oh yes, I just went to my first funeral, and she said I'm 73 or 74, like mid 70s, and I thought. And she said, and it was my father, and I was so afraid, and my heart just melted. I thought, 76 years of fear around, like growing fear around what will it be like. And so, in those moments for me, and not everybody would be grateful for this, but I felt so much gratitude around being exposed to it at such a young age.
Yeah, even having this conversation is interesting and important because I think, people want to avoid having this conversation. We don't want to talk about death. And just even the perception, death is viewed as somehow you lost. There's winners and losers, and the winners are the living. I think to fully embrace life, we have to be mindful that there's an end.
For sure. There's so many great teachers that I've had and learned from, whether they were authors that I read or whomever. But even having all this exposure and sort of where Jamie and I came to doing the work that we do, uh, it wasn't really until I did the deep dive and my own work, so to speak, through those 5 semesters of hard study, that I realized how much richer my life had become when I was able to integrate death daily in my thoughts, in my words, and in all that I do. That feeling of impermanence is different than the knowing of impermanence. I think hard to explain, but it's another sort of sideways comparison is I'm still working in the corporate world in my day job, and I've let everybody know that I'll be retiring at 65, which is 1 year, 10 months, 1 day from now, and and so we all joke about my countdown, and the thing I don't say out loud is I do this because A, I love Excel formulas, but B, because I know there is another countdown happening. I just don't know what that time period is. But every time I talk about my retirement countdown, it pops into mind. Yeah, there's another one happening, and this day becomes richer. My conversation with you becomes more important. My saying goodbye to Tim in the morning on my way out becomes more important. All of those things matter more.
Yeah, I think I've experienced that too getting older, and I haven't been as consciously living and certainly studying thanatology the way you have. But just that realization that, yeah, life is precious and losing. Yeah, when you talk about losing someone, when you start to lose people who you love, and for me, my big and most important death, as you know, was my mother. It just changed everything, right? It was my crucible. I'm a way better person, for one thing. And I'm a more compassionate person.
Oh, yeah. I like to think I am. I sure hope I am.
You are.
Yeah. It changed everything when I started doing the work. At that time I was teaching at SAID. I became a different teacher in the classroom. I became a different life partner to my husband, a different auntie. Oh my God, did that change night and day? A different sister, a different everything. Every part of my being was different.
So, how were you changed? And I guess at some level, there's a universal experience of when a human loses someone that they love dearly, we are changed. And it's not only in negative ways. Like, I
Right.
mean, certainly grief, we'll talk about that. But how were you changed? You talked about this changing relationship with your, nieces or nephews, for example. How did you change?
Yeah. I guess I would say that the gravity of responsibility in the short time we have. So while I always felt I was auntie. I didn't have any kids of my own, have 11 nieces and nephews, 11 great nieces and nephews that I just adore every one of them. Um, I started to wonder, did they know how much I adored them? And and the answer was no, because I was busy being me in life, and so I really made it a conscious effort to make sure they knew that. I think it's 22 people. I don't know if I've been successful all the way around, but I'm getting there, and hopefully I'll have time to complete that. The other thing was, I think, much more practice around remembering the ancestors. So I went through a 6-year period where I started just briefly thinking to myself, okay, my nieces and nephews don't know my aunts and uncles. And so I'm the youngest of the generation. And so with that comes, I feel, a great responsibility to carry memory. And so I started with just a few of my nieces and nephews on my email list and said, on the death days or birthdays of my aunts and uncles, I would share a story about them that I remembered or that I knew of, just to acknowledge them. And soon the list grew, and the things I talked about, I think, were very important for my nieces and nephews. They certainly commented that way. Cousins asked to be added. Some came on, some dropped off. It was a bit too much for some, and absolutely, loads of compassion for that. But yeah, so it brought me closer to my nieces and nephews by introducing them to their ancestors, and the hopes that someday I'll be a good one. And then I often remember one time in the classroom, I had the great privilege of working with many Indigenous, some of our First Nations bands teaching at SAID. And I remember one day I was just starting a new 6-week program, Microsoft training, and I had a group from Tsuut'ina, and I started the day by saying, how many of you are currently in active grief, knowing that there is, again, because they're so close in community, that is so prevalent. And out of 14 students, I think 11 hands went up. And so pretty tough to learn 6 hours straight a day for 6 weeks of Microsoft when there's that much active grief in the room. And so, we just had a LED candle. We talked about the waves of grief, making sure that people had permission to come and go out of the room, come back to it. So yeah, I think it made me a better teacher.
Thanks for listening. If you like the show, please tell your friends.